In the heart of Manhattan, New York, there stands a building which conceals its past. This is 22 Vanderbilt, a fairly nondescript modern office tower that houses various PR and tech firms. But beneath this glass and granite facade, there lies another structure, a relic of a bygone era. It is the iron skeleton of the Biltmore Hotel, New York. Once a splendid and widely celebrated luxury hotel that operated from 1913 until its demise in 1981 when it turned into the building we see today. The hotel had magnificent ballrooms and rooftop gardens, a Turkish bath, and an elaborate clock in the Palm Court, which was famous as a meeting place for everyone from writers such as J.D. Salinger and F. Scott Fitzgerald to the countless young students who frequented the hotel. Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald were even once kicked out of their hotel room, bath still running, after their honeymoon party became too riotous, disturbing the other guests. Reporter Christopher Gray describes the hotel saying, "The Biltmore, and in particular its clock, became almost as much an institution as Grand Central itself. And it is here in the Grand Cascades Ballroom, one evening in May 1941, that we encounter a figure central to this story. It was the inaugural dinner of Pen in Exile, a group of German writers who had fled their homeland to escape the horrors of the Second World War. Among them was one of the most celebrated and widely published authors of their time, Stefan Zweig. Zweig, who was Jewish, had fled Vienna, Austria just 8 years prior to this evening in May. Many of the authors spoke that night, but according to reports, none so moved the audience as the short speech given by Stefan Zweig. He spoke of his shame and sorrow for what was happening in Europe. He spoke of the Nazi uprising as an almost metaphysical threat, not just to himself and others, but to his language, which as a writer he held very dear. George Prochnik, in this book, The Impossible Exile, recounts part of his speech. "We writers of the German language feel a secret and tormenting shame because these decrees of oppression are conceived and drafted in the German language, the same language in which we write and think. I feel it is my duty publicly to ask forgiveness of each of you for everything which today is inflicted upon your peoples in the name of the German spirit." 50 years later, the Biltmore Hotel, New York was replaced by the Bank of America Plaza.
To him who has often told the tales of others, many tales will be told. Sorry.
Our story continues here at 6 Rue Princesse Saint-Germain, Paris. This is the former location of the Village Voice bookshop, which closed on July 31st, 2012. The owner of the shop was Odile Helly. She was the daughter of a French army officer who escaped a German POW camp to join the resistance during the Second World War. Sometime before its closing, director Wes Anderson walked into this very Wes Anderson-looking bookshop and was introduced to Stefan Zweig when he picked up this book, Beware of Pity, and started reading. "To him that hath, to him shall be given." These words from the scriptures the writer may safely restate as, "To him that hath told much, to him much shall be told." Nothing is further from the truth than the only too common notion that the author's fantasy is incessantly at work within him. To the person who has over and over again tried to trace human destinies, many tell their own story. Wes was so engrossed that he stood in the bookshop reading for 45 minutes before he finally purchased the book and left. What so captured his attention was the way Zweig framed the story as a series of nesting encounters that ended with the book's fictional author meeting a character who told the author his life story. It was this framing device that ended up becoming the inspiration for the opening sequence of the Grand Budapest Hotel.
It is an extremely common mistake. People think the writer's imagination is always at work, that he's constantly inventing an endless supply of incidents and episodes.
Who wouldn't? At the Grand Budapest, sir. It's an institution.
The Grand Budapest Hotel is Wes Anderson's 8th feature film. It's so far his most financially successful and his most widely acclaimed. It won 4 Oscars, and it felt like a marked step forward in his already iconic personal style. There's so much I could talk about with this film. The exacting precision of the plot and its pace, the way it seems to unfold like a mechanical snow globe music box, each piece fitting together with the confidence of a practiced storyteller. People have talked endlessly about the beauty of its color palettes, set design, and costume design, and of course I could talk about the many beautifully constructed shots in the film or the quality of performance from Ralph Fiennes as Gustav H. I myself love this movie. I've seen it countless times, including the director's commentary twice. I've read the screenplay and the companion book put together by film critic Matt Zoller's Sights. I could tell you the Easter eggs. I know that Willem Dafoe's boots are custom Prada. I know that the size of the boy with apple painting is different in this scene than it is in this scene because Wes Anderson thought it looked better to have Saoirse Ronan carrying a smaller painting. I could point out how the window in the prison cell is a different shape in this shot than it is in this shot. I could tell you that Harvey Keitel lived for a few days with his cellmates in this prison cell in preparation for their scenes. I could tell you that all the monks' heads were shaved in this scene despite the fact that they all ended up covered. I could show you the image of the hotel that inspired the Grand Budapest Hotel itself, that of Hotel Pup in Karlovy Vary, Carlsbad from the Library of Congress Photochrome collection. I could talk about how I think this movie is at least partially responsible for the popularization of using multiple aspect ratios as a storytelling technique, which when this movie came out with its 4 aspect ratios wasn't that common, but which now is a fairly widely accepted way of showing different periods of time or different perspectives in both film and television. I've talked in the past in another video about the extent to which the movie draws on references to other filmmakers and films, quietly presenting itself as a fairly thorough pastiche of films set in European hotels. There's so much beautiful detail and technical handiwork on the surface of this film to admire that I think in many ways the real heart of the film, the beauty that lies in a story that at first seems equal parts distant and fantastical, actually has a sort of universal resonance. I think the Grand Budapest Hotel has been as successful as it has been, not just because of the film's visual novelty, but in fact because of the depth and sincerity that lies beneath the film's Mendel's-esque sugarcoating. In the Wes Anderson collection book about the film, Matt Zoller's Sights describes the film's emotion as something that unfolds with multiple viewings, and this is something that I've found to be true for myself as well. On the first watch, it's very easy to be caught up in the pretty lights of this madcap action mystery caper. When the film's emotional moments do come, they are quick and stabbing.
In the end, they shot him.
And they are gone almost as quickly as they arrive. I wasn't moved by the movie the first time I saw it, and detractors of Wes Anderson's work often find it somewhat emotionally distant. But as you revisit the film, I think its underlying melancholy becomes more apparent. When you know Zero and Agatha's story is going to end like this,
She and our infant son would be killed 2 years later by the Prussian grippe, an absurd little disease.
the brief moments where older Zero talks about her earlier in the film becomes more poignant. When you know the finality of Gustav's trajectory, there's a more apparent loneliness in his character from the start. The emotional subtext is there, it's just when you don't know what you're looking for the first time around, it's easy to get lost in all the... And of course, this splicing of moments of striking emotion into what feel like otherwise unassuming, quirky comedies or adventures has been part of Wes Anderson's MO from the beginning. This move is part of the hidden beauty that I'm talking about, but it's not all of it. I think the real thing that makes the Grand Budapest Hotel Wes Anderson's most unique and successful film lies deeper than that. As the film opens, we see a young woman who we never learn anything about, but what we do know is that she's been so moved by the book she's reading that she makes a pilgrimage to visit the statue of an author. I think what the Grand Budapest Hotel is really about on its deepest level can only really be understood by understanding the life of the author whose work the film is inspired by, Stefan Zweig. One of the things we quickly find when reading Stefan Zweig's description of his hometown Vienna in his memoir, The World of Yesterday, is that his description of the place has a similar quality to the way the Grand Budapest Hotel and the country of Zubrowka are portrayed through the perspective of Gustav H. in the movie. The movie's immaculate representation of the past isn't just a fun novelty. It also serves the purpose of actually embodying the fantastical nostalgia and almost hopelessly rose-tinted image of the past that both Zweig and Gustav share. For Zweig, Vienna wasn't just ideal in its aesthetic beauty. He describes a cultural atmosphere of progressive optimism, one that appreciated arts and culture, valued humanity, tolerated differences, and felt secure and peaceful. Some of the stories he tells of Vienna speak to this kind of fanaticism of culture and art. There was a famous old theater that had held many performances from famous classical musicians that was going to be torn down. And in protest at the final performance, the entire audience sat silently in darkness and refused to leave. But to understand Zweig, we got to understand that the loss of these places, like the loss of a hotel or a famous concert house, wasn't just about the loss of those physical locations. It was about what losing those things represented. At the turn of the 20th century in Vienna, the way Zweig describes it, polite society wasn't just a nicety. It was a philosophy of life that would finally usher in a modern era of civilized peace.
Rudeness is merely the expression of fear. People fear they won't get what they want. The most dreadful and unattractive person only needs to be loved, and they will open up like a flower.
You can see pieces of Zweig in the author characters Zero and Gustav H. A successful and respected author, someone who had to flee because of the destruction of war, and finally a lover of art, culture, and society, who has to watch the things they love be destroyed by fascist uprising. For him, the rise of fascist Germany, the restriction of freedoms, and the destruction of the city that he loved represented the loss of a specific philosophical ideal and way of life. I think we see this in the speech that he gives at the Penn dinner in New York during his exile. He's not just apologizing for specific events, he's apologizing for something that he sees as a more severe metaphysical or philosophical loss. This whole discussion relates to my last video where I introduced the concept of metamodernism, and you don't have to have seen that video to appreciate this section, but I'm going to expound on those ideas a little bit here. Wes Anderson, I think, is a fantastic example of a metamodern director. And one of the ways I think we can see Wes Anderson's metamodernism shine is in how he interacts with this more postmodern sort of attitude that crops up in some of Zweig's work. In the metamodernism video, I describe how there's kind of this shift from modernism to postmodernism in arts and culture as some of the promises of modernism begin to sour with the world wars and other events throughout the 20th century. Zweig, in his memoir, The World of Yesterday, describes this prevailing modernist sentiment that he experienced growing up in Vienna as having a kind of religious quality. In its liberal idealism, the 19th century was honestly convinced that it was on the direct and infallible road to the best of all possible worlds. The people of the time scornfully looked down on earlier epochs with their wars, famines, and revolutions as periods when mankind had not yet come of age and was insufficiently enlightened. Now, however, it was a mere matter of decades before they finally saw an end to violence and evil, and in those days this faith in uninterrupted, inexorable progress truly had the force of a religion. People believed in progress more than in the Bible, and its gospel message seemed incontestably proven by new miracles of science and technology that were revealed daily. This was the feeling of optimism that Zweig was watching be destroyed by the wars, and he describes the feeling of that loss quite viscerally. We long ago ceased believing in the religion of our fathers, their faith in the swift and enduring ascent of humanity. Having learnt our cruel lessons, we see their overhasty optimism as banal in the face of a catastrophe that, with a single blow, canceled out 1,000 years of human effort. The Grand Budapest Hotel isn't just about personal or material loss and the grief of that loss. It's also about the loss of idealism. I think it's maybe easy to see both Gustav H. and Zweig as a little bit hopelessly idealist and nostalgic, and the perfect vision they had of society was never that truly perfect.
To be frank, I think his world had vanished long before he ever entered it.
But I think this exaggerated kind of nostalgic representation of the past and that feeling of loss does tap into something that a lot of us do experience. And I think a lot of us succumb to a kind of nostalgia or idealism, whether for the past or the future, more than we care to admit. And so it's in this way that I think the Grand Budapest Hotel takes on a kind of archetypal representation of this loss of idealism that we maybe don't experience in the very extreme version that someone like Stefan Zweig experienced, but which we inevitably experience as part of our everyday lives. And I think these losses that are in the past have more ongoing relevance to our lives than we might think.
Stand clear, please. Stand clear, everyone.
Listen to this.
Contact!
That's the sound of a German bomb from World War II exploding. During the production of Fantastic Mr. Fox in London, an unexploded bomb from the Blitz was found in a canal next to the production studio. Production had to be shut down for a few days so that the bomb could be safely detonated. And when it was, Wes Anderson and the crew recorded the sound and then ended up using it in Fantastic Mr. Fox. You might not be living in Vienna in the 1900s watching it be destroyed by war, or the concierge of a grand hotel watching it be stomped by fascist goons. You might not be a war refugee losing your young wife to an absurd little disease. But you do live in a world that is still tangibly grappling with the loss and fallout from major wars that were happening only a few generations ago, even as we continue to deal with our own loss and change. In 2023, cultural optimism has been on a decline for what feels like about a decade for a lot of reasons. And I think the fact that the Grand Budapest Hotel speaks to those feelings and came out in 2014 is part of its success. Grief is often a recognition of something beautiful being taken from us. Without any beauty or goodness, there is no sadness in the loss of that thing. This is why the movie's beauty goes hand in hand with its discussion of grief and loss. That discussion wouldn't be as powerful if it didn't portray something being lost so beautifully. In this way, it mirrors another film that I love about the Second World War, A Hidden Life. The way Terrence Malick captures in this movie the absolutely stunning beauty of the Austrian Alps with a kind of idyllic perfection sets up the pure horror of that ideal being destroyed by the war.
Why are we stopping at a barley field again?
I find these black uniforms very drab.
But there's one more ingredient to this movie and how it handles these themes. We all deal with loss or grief in our lifetime, and when we lose things, it hurts. And a lot of times, as humans, as people, we don't feel comfortable talking about our pain, our grief, or our hurt. And so we kind of have this tendency to bury that pain in stories. And stories are also a way we try to capture and hold on to what was lost in the past and bring it into the future. In the end, Zweig's exile was too much for him to bear. But Anderson brings a metamodernist view to the despair of Zweig's life. The film begins and ends with a monument to the author, not Zweig explicitly, but almost to the concept itself, because stories are one way what is lost can live on. Just as Mustafa maintains the hotel in memory of Agatha, we can maintain some connection to a past we've lost through storytelling. When we understand that the world we live in is one of constant and inevitable change, and that change almost always comes with a sense of loss, and that we're grappling with the echoes and residues of losses in our past, even as we deal with losses in our present. And when we understand that stories and storytellers are ways of trying to keep and maintain the things we've lost, even while they're painful reminders of what we've lost at the same time, then we begin to understand the hidden beauty of the Grand Budapest Hotel. When doing research about Wes Anderson's films, one of the things that I constantly come across is that for an American director, he's been incredibly and deeply influenced by all kinds of international filmmaking. When he talks about his favorite films, they're almost always movies from France, India, Japan, Germany, or other places all over the globe. One of the best places that you can watch international cinema is with my sponsor for this video, Mubi. Mubi is an online, hand-curated streaming service with exceptional films from all around the world. They're constantly adding films all the time with an explanation of why it's worth your time. So it's a great place to find new and interesting stuff to watch that you can't find anywhere else. I also want to mention their podcast, which is a great resource for learning more about the behind the scenes of filmmaking. Their third season is called The Needle on the Record, and it covers the use of music in film and famous needle drops. They talk about movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Donnie Darko. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. Go to Mubi.com/ThomasFlight to get an extended 30-day free trial of Mubi to start exploring wonderful international and classic cinema today. Mubi.com/ThomasFlight, or click the link in the description below for your 30-day free trial of Mubi. Thanks again to Mubi for sponsoring this video.